Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with a type of video I haven't done in quite a while. I always wanted to do more of, where almost 2 years ago I did do a video on the history of the winners edit, where I went through every season of the show and talked about how the winner was edited on that season. And since then I've been wanting to do more Edgic-related videos, but never really found the time to do so. However, with the latest season of Survivor 41, being one where within the Edgic community there was a lot of talk about the complex tribe theory, this theory within Edgic that the winner of the season comes from the tribe that was portrayed in the most complex way in the pre-merge. So here I decided to go through every season of the show and talk about whether or not that theory holds up for every season of the show. And now before doing so, I should more so outline what this complex tribe theory actually means. Again, the complex tribe is the tribe that was shown with the most complexity. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the tribe that got more screen time. I mean, screen time is usually allocated to the tribe that ends up going to tribal. So just because you get more screen time doesn't mean that that tribe is the complex tribe. The complex tribe is a tribe that utilizes the most out of its screen time. Having relationships that are set up that are clear to be important later down the road. Having storylines that are set up that are clear to be important down the road. For the dynamics of the tribe to be fully outlined to us, to where we have a good understanding of where the tribe is laid out. Like, that is what truly makes a complex tribe. It's really utilizing the airtime that these tribes get in order to give us a full grasp on the entirety of the tribe, more so than just the amount of time that they're on the screen. So with that, let's run through every season of the show and talk about whether or not these seasons follow this theory. So with that, obviously we're starting off with Survivor Borneo. Now, most Edgic concepts, Borneo simply doesn't follow a lot of them, mainly because there were no editing trends at this point in Survivor. Again, Edgic is following the editing trends and storylines in order to figure out what's going to happen afterwards. And with a season like Borneo, there were no trends to go off of. So again, the complex tribe theory is tough to associate with the season. However, I do think if you try to, it does work. I mean, the winner does come from Tagi, and I do think Tagi is the tribe that we get the most strategy from. Mind you, that's because it was reality, but here we do know the full scope of the tribe. We do know the 4-person alliance that ends up coming into the merge. We know Sean is kind of this person left on the outs. We have relationships like Rich and Rudy. We have Kelly and Sue. While on Pagong, again, obviously there are not many alliances there. I think a lot of the relationships are a lot more hazy. We're outside of like Greg and Colleen and Joel and Jervis. Like, none of the relationships there are really highlighted too much. So again, I think with this, you can say Tagi is the complex tribe, but I don't think it's because it was anything done intentionally. Next up for Australian Outback, the winner did come from Ogakor, and the thing about Australian Outback to me is I feel like both tribes have a relative amount of complexity. I don't think either of them are more complex than the other, so I won't necessarily say that the theory works here, but it doesn't necessarily not work. I mean, Ogakor does contain a lot of the main characters by the time of the merge, and Colby and Jerry, and debatably Tina. But again, Kucha does contain a similar amount of notable characters from Barner and Scoopin, which obviously very questionable now, but again, at the time, big characters. We knew all about the Elizabeth and Roger relationship. I mean, to me, I feel like they were both around the same level of complexity, where I think there's actually probably an argument that Ogakor is the least complex of the two, considering the Tina and Colby relationship isn't really that highlighted in the pre-merge. So again, I think there is a debate there, but again, I think this is more so chalked up to the fact that they weren't really utilizing any normal editing trends at this point, considering, again, it's a very early season. Next up, we got Survivor Africa, and I would also say here, I think Samburu might be the complex tribe here instead of Baran, the tribe that has the winner on it. Where, for me on Samburu, it's like we know the full outline of the tribe. We know it's a 4v4, the young versus the old. We get some really defined characters there in Silas, Lindsay, and Frank. While on Baran, I don't feel like we know the dynamics of that tribe outside of the fact that the 3 guys are together, and Ethan, Lex, and Tom. Outside that, we don't really know the inner workings of that group. We don't really see a lot of the relationships between the other people either, outside of the fact that everyone hates Clarence. So I think this is another season where, to me, the theory doesn't really hold up. But then we get to Survivor Marquesas, and I think this is the first true example of the complex tribe theory. However, again, to me, whether or not it was purposeful is a question here, where between Mara'amu and Rotu, Mara'amu is the much more well-defined tribe. And despite Mara'amu only being 2 of the final 9, we do know so much more about this group, and again, that can be chalked up to the fact that they do go to tribal a lot. But Rotu really gets very minimal content before the swap, where Haskell and Aaliyah, who become a power duo later on, barely get content there. Kathy gets set up as the outsider and does get the start of her journey at it. And John Carroll gets portrayed as the leader, but there's just so many people, like the Generals of the world, the Tammys of the world, the Zoes of the world, where I feel like on Mara'amu, we do know a lot about that group, and that group includes so many of the bigger characters on the season. You got Sean, you got Boston Rob, you got Hunter, you got obviously the eventual winner in Vesepia. You got Gina Cruz, the person who gets the biggest pre-merge edit in the history of the show. Plus, again, like we know how the tribe was broken down. We know the 4-person alliance with Rob, Sarah, Sean, and V that was holding control of the numbers. We do see the relationship between Rob and Sean and V, and Rob and Sarah, and Hunter and Rob, and Hunter and Gina. It's like, again, we get so much more from Mara'amu here, and I do think this is a good example of the complex tribe theory. Next up, we're moving on to Thailand, where we have Chuigan containing the winner, and I do think this is another one where Chuigan does clearly have more of the major characters of the season. Brian, Clay, Helen, Turd. I feel like we know a lot more about the Chuigan members than we do about Sukchai. However, I will say that I do think the breakdown of the tribe is a lot more obvious on Sukchai than it is on Chuigan, where right from the beginning on Sukchai, we know who's in the majority group, and that group ends up sticking together the entire time. However, I mean, Chuigan does also get the men versus women storyline, and that does end up playing out there. We do see Brian and Helen's relationship, and really, I will say Chuigan is the more complex tribe, so I do think the theory works here. Now for Survivor the Amazon, the winner does come from the Jabiru tribe, and I will say to me, neither of these tribes come off as that well defined. Now, in pertaining to the winner in Jenna, I mean, she does get the young girls alliance early on, where we see them together. But outside of that, I don't feel like the Jabiru dynamics were that well defined. Especially when in reality, they were closer to working with Dina than they were with Shauna, which wasn't really well illustrated on the show. But I'm not really saying that Tamaki was that well defined either. And Roger was the leader of the tribe. Obviously, Rob's sister Nina was on that tribe, who becomes the biggest character of the season. But it's I really don't feel like either tribe was really that well defined with that many storylines that really end up playing that major of a factor later on. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the theory works here, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it doesn't either. Next up from Survivor Islands, we do have the Drake tribe, where I feel like this one's pretty clear. I think Drake's the more complex tribe by quite a bit here. I mean, Morgan to me really wasn't well defined in terms of their relationships. I mean, yes, we did know the majority group, but we didn't know much about the relationships within that majority group. I mean, we knew that Savage was the leader of the majority. They do take out Ryan and Lil and Nicole Delma, but the relationships within that 5-person majority weren't as well defined on the show. And really, outside of Savage here, I do feel like a lot of the people that make it far from this tribe are more so non-factors on the show than in comparison to the Drake tribe, where you do have Fairplay, who does have a more subdued pre-merge than a post-merge, but still massive character there. We see his rivalry with Sandra. Sandra also has her relationship with Krista and Rupert. Rupert's obviously the massive character that he is. We do see dynamics break down with Rupert and Burton leading their individual alliances. Really, Drake to me is the more complex tribe in every conceivable way here, so I do think it works out here. Next up from All Stars, we are at our first 3-tribe season, but the winner here does come from the Chapera tribe. And I will say that 3-tribe seasons are very tough to assess when it comes to complex tribe theory, just because the editing in general is very wonky when it comes to 3 tribes, due to usually one tribe being shown less than the other 2. So this is really usually a situation where you can eliminate one tribe, more so than say that one of the 3 tribes in particular is a complex tribe. However, here with All Stars, I feel like it's very tough to assess which tribe is really the complex tribe, where Chapera is the tribe that contains the winner, but I feel like a lot of Shapira's content ends up being revolved around Rob and Amber, with the other people within that not getting as much content. I would say that Shapira is a weird tribe to say is the complex tribe, but considering this was the first season with the 3-tribe format, I do think there is some leeway here, especially considering this is also an all-star season as well, which also mixes up some things. So I don't think the theory fully works here, but I also don't think it's a major knock for it not to. Next up, we do have Vanuatu, and I think this is one of the bigger examples of this theory just simply not working. And here we do have Lepevi containing the winner, where we do get a very outlined dynamic within the tribe of the old versus the young. I mean, the Fat Five taking out the 4 younger people, and that's fine. However, one, all the younger people are non-factors on this season for the most part, and then really only Chris, Sarge, and Rory are that prominent figures from the majority group there as well, while it is the other tribe, the Yasur tribe, that is the more complex tribe to me, that does get a lot more outline dynamics in the pre-merge, does contain a lot more of the major characters of the season. Mind you, a lot of that is because they contain 6 of the final 7. And I think that's definitely a factor here. But on that tribe, you do have like Amy, you have Twyla, you have Scout, you have Eliza, you have Julie Berry, you have all these figures that are some of the most important characters on the season, plus also the fact that they are a very well-defined tribe in terms of their dynamics. And also we have these relationships like the Eliza-Twyla rivalry there that does continue for most of the season. So again, for me, I do feel like Lepevi is clearly not the complex tribe here. Next up for Survivor Palau, where obviously Karor is the tribe that contains the winner. And I think the general assumption would be to say that, oh, Karor's not the complex tribe because they never go to tribal in the pre-merge. However, I think that's just straight up wrong. I think the thing is that I think Karor is the complex tribe in comparison to Oolong, where yes, Oolong goes to every tribal and obviously gets a lot of screen time because of that. However, Oolong is a very uncomplex tribe, where to me, like, I feel like I know nothing about the actual dynamics of the Oolong tribe. I know nothing about the alliances on that group. I know nothing about how these votes played out. While on Karor, even before the merge, we very much knew the dynamics of that group. We knew Tom and Ian were together. We knew that Katie was with them. We knew that Greg and Jen were together. We knew that Kobe was kind of on the outs of that group. We knew that Tom and Karen had a relationship. Like, we knew a lot more about Karor, despite the fact that they didn't go to tribal, than we did with Oolong. And to me, this is the first of many examples that we'll be talking about of when a tribe that doesn't go to tribal ends up being the clear complex tribe over a tribe that does go to tribal constantly. But next up, we're moving on to Guatemala. And to me, this is a very strange season to use this theory on, considering the fact that they end up swapping very early on, and after that swap, it's actually the swapped tribes that end up mattering more come into the merge than it is the initial tribes. Now, Danny is from the original Nukum tribe, which I will say that I feel like if we are going to use the theory here, I don't think it fully works. I do think Yasha was portrayed as the most complex tribe before the swap, where I do feel like Nukum, we knew very little about the inner dynamics within that group. But really, again, it is to me the post-swap tribes that end up mattering a bit more here. But even there, I do think there is a serious debate if Danny's tribe was even the complex tribe there, as I do feel like both tribes were portrayed kind of similarly at that point, where both of them had around the same level of complexity to me. So for me, I feel like Guatemala is a season that the theory doesn't really work on. Next up, we're moving on to Panama, and in a similar case, obviously there are the original tribes that only lasted 1 episode. However, I don't think that is really that important here. I mean, Viveros is the tribe that contained the winner. They were barely shown. So really, I do think it is the swap tribes that we're going to be talking about. So Kasaya 2.0. And I mean, come on, Kasaya is clearly the more complex tribe here. I mean, almost all the major characters, really all the major characters except for Terry are on Kasaya here, with so many relationships that end up factoring into the end game. I mean, you got, again, Aris, Danielle, Suri, Shane, Courtney, even a Bruce. I mean, all these figures are much more complex than the Sallys of the world or the Nicks of the world. So, I mean, to me, I think this is a clear-cut case to me. Kasaya is the more complex tribe. Next up for Crook Islands, and again, kind of a weird one, where again, we did have Puka Puka being the tribe that the winner comes from here. Though, again, like, is rarely shown. I mean, really, most of Puka Puka's content revolves around Cowboy. Though we do get a short glimpse of the Yule-Becky relationship So in this case, I think we are looking again at the swap tribes, and I do think Aikutaki is clearly the more complex swap tribe than Rero, where on I2 we do, again, see Yul and Becky together. We do see their alliance with Candace and Penner. We do see Penner and Yul's relationship, which plays a major factor at the merge. And the tribe dynamics there are very well defined, and once the mutiny ends up happening, this tribe is blatantly shown as the underdogs, which ends up being a storyline that continues on even beyond this. While the Rero tribe is barely defined. I mean, we really don't know a lot about the dynamics on the original Rero tribe, outside of whatever was important to that individual vote out that we see like immediately before it happens. So again, to me, I think this is a clear-cut case. I do think I2 is the complex tribe here. Next up, we do have Survivor Fiji, where again, the winner does come from Ravu. And again, this is another clear-cut case. Ravu is clearly the more complex tribe here. Again, having this Earl-Yao relationship that becomes very important moving forward, having this underdog status that becomes prominent moving forward as well. And in comparison to their opposition, the Moto tribe, Moto just really got very little complexity. I mean, yes, we did know the initial power dynamics there, but really we got very few relationships there that ended up being set up as being important moving forward. So for me, I do think Ravu is a clear complex tribe. Next up from Survivor China, we have Fei Long. And this is a situation where, like, I don't think Zhanhu is necessarily uncomplex. I just feel like Fei Long is more complex. Where Fei Long obviously contains a lot more of the big characters in the season. You got James, you got Todd, you got Amanda, you got Courtney, you got Jean Robert. You have these setup relationships there with Todd and Amanda being together, with the rivalry between Courtney and Jean Robert. Oh, while Zhanhu has some setup relationships, but a lot of them are taken out early. Again, like, you have the rivalry between Dave and Ashley, and they go home relatively early. PG is set up as a pretty complex character, but by the time of the merge, I mean, she's really the only one left. So it's like, again, to me, I do feel like Fei Long is the clear complex tribe here. Next up, we do have Survivor Micronesia, where Molokol is the tribe that contained a winner, the Favorites tribe. And I mean, again, this is kind of a weird one because, again, the Favorites were always going to have a clear advantage in terms of screen time here. However, I do feel like they had more defined dynamics. We did also get to see the Parvati-Amanda Suri relationship that very clearly became important later on. While on the Fans tribe, again, a lot more of the relationships were very hazy. Like, we do see this flip happen against Mikey B, but know very little about the relationships that caused that to happen outside of Tracy tricking Joel. Like, the relationship between, like, Natalie and Alexis and Eric and Jason and all these other relationships are barely shown here, and I do think that has a major knock against the fans. So for me, I do feel like the Favorites were clearly the complex tribe. Next up, we got Survivor Gabon, and to me, this is a weird one because I do feel like both tribes get a decent amount of complexity. Now, we do get a pretty early swap from this season that kind of messes some things up, but I do feel like both tribes get a decent amount of screen time. And Coda does contain the winner and does get some complexity through the fact that we do know about the Onion Alliance. We do know the different pieces of the Onion, but I do feel like Fong gets a decent amount of content as well. Now, I do think Fong's dynamics are a lot less blatant to the viewer. However, I do feel like a lot of the Fong members were set up as big characters on the season. However, a lot of that is because a lot of them make it very far into the season. So I do think this is a situation where, like, I would probably still say Coda is the complex tribe, as they were unnecessarily shown to have complexity, while Fong's was more so felt like it needed to be shown, and even then we didn't really get that many scenes of their inner workings of their relationship. So I do feel like Coda is probably the complex tribe here. Next up for Tocantins, we do have the winner coming from Jalapao, and I think this is a pretty clear one to me. Again, like, the relationship between JT and Steven and Taj is a lot more complexity than what we ever get from Timbira, which Timbira largely focuses around Coach and Coach's rivalry with Brendan that ends at the very beginning of the merge. So again, to me, there is not much longevity there with Timbira, while Jalapao, again, the complexity within those core relationships did always make them scream out to me as the more complex tribe there. Next up for Survivor Samoa, we have Foa Foa, and I mean, this is a weird one because just the edit of Samoa is very wonky just due to how much content Russell Hantz got. However, Russell Hantz was on Foa Foa and ends up dominating the screen time to the point where Galu gets very few storylines set up there. Now, I will say that Galu gets their dynamics shown to us pretty well, where we do see that eventually becomes like a men's versus women's thing. We do have the Laura Shambo rivalry being set up there, but again, for the most part, and Foa Foa just ends up dominating the screen time, and Russell Hantz alone adds so much complexity to that tribe to where considering he was getting the majority of the content, I will still say that Fofo is probably the more complex tribe there. Next up, for Heroes vs. Villains, we have the Villains tribe. And again, All-Star seasons to me are very weird, but I will say the Villains were very clearly the more complex tribe here. Now, I will say that, again, this is a situation where the Heroes were not necessarily uncomplex. Like, we did know a lot of the inner workings of the Heroes tribe in terms of their dynamics. However, I do feel like very few storylines were set up from the Heroes tribe outside of Colby's incompetence and JT becoming a villain, and the JT villain one, again, ends very soon after the merge. While on the Villains tribe, again, we get so much complexity there between Russell, once again, but his relationship with Parvati and Danielle. We see his rivalry with Sandra. We have the Boston Rob Russell rivalry as well. I mean, really, the Villains tribe to me is very clearly a complex tribe. I mean, yes, you do have a couple people who get a bit under-edited, namely like Courtney and a Tyson. However, pretty much everyone else on that tribe gets so much complexity that I do feel like the Villains tribe was clearly the complex tribe here. Next up, we're moving on to Survivor Nicaragua, where we have LaFleur. And again, like LaFleur, very clearly the complex tribe to me. Again, we knew the entire dynamics of the tribe. We had people like Sash and Brenda and Nyanka and Fabio being set up as major characters, while Espada mostly revolved around Marty and Jimmy Johnson. And with Jimmy Johnson being a relatively early boot there, it really felt like we knew very little about the other people within Marty's alliance. People like Jill, people like a Tyrone, people like an Eve. So to me, again, this is another clear-cut case. I do think LaFleur was the complex tribe here. Next up for Redemption Island, we do have Omatepe. And this is a weird one because, again, kind of like Samoa, it has one person kind of hogging up all the screen time, with Boston Rob getting most of the screen time for that tribe. But I mean, through that, we do get a lot of complexity for that tribe that mostly stems from him. Overall, Zapatero really stays one note for the majority of it. We don't really get the inner workings of their tribe dynamics until very late into it, with most of their content early on being surrounded by Russell Hantz and them trying to get him out, and then his allies immediately afterwards. So again, for me, I do feel like Omatepe is the complex tribe here as well. Next up, we got Survivor South Pacific, where Upolu contains the winner. I will say that I think both of these tribes were relatively complex. I don't think this is a clear-cut case of like Upolu is the only complex tribe here. Again, I think both of them had pretty well-defined dynamics. On Savai'i, we did know about all these duos and Jim Rice kind of being the middle of all of them. On Upolu, we knew about Coach's alliance and the stranglehold that they had. But this is another one where, again, Coach does hog up a lot of screen time, getting most of the complex content for his tribe. But considering that tribe has like a Rick and an Albert and even a Sophie who doesn't get that much screen time in the pre-merge. But even on Savai'i, again, you have like a Keith, you have a Whitney, you have a Elise. So again, like I do think it is a very wonky season to really associate the complex tribe there. Next up, we do have Survivor One World, with Solani being the tribe that contains the winner. And again, to me, again, very clearly, they are the more complex tribe here, more so than the men, who just have this one basic storyline that revolves around Colton throughout the entire pre-merge, with Colton going out before the merge, while Solani contains more of the prominent figures from the season. Again, you get a lot of content from Sabrina and Alicia, and good complex content from Kim in the pre-merge. To me, again, this one's a no-brainer. To me, Solani is the clear-cut choice here. Next up for Philippines. Again, this is a weird one because, again, we're back to a 3-tribe format. And this is one where the winner does come from the Mat Singh tribe, the tribe that goes to tribal 4 times in a row at the first 4 episodes before they get dissolved. So I do think this is kind of a weird case where, like, I guess you would say Mat Singh is the complex tribe, but it was kind of one done by necessity, more so than because of the editors trying to portray their winner and the group around them in a specific way, which is kind of the point of the complex tribe theory. And I will also say that I don't feel like the other 2 tribes are necessarily uncomplex either. I mean, like on Calabao, we get a lot of content between Penner and Jeff Kent and their rivalry, while also setting up the men versus women's thing. On Tendang, we do have a lot of content between the Abby and RC rivalry, and also Pete doing his own thing. We see Scoopin and RC have a relationship, Scoopin and Lisa have a relationship. So again, I could see an argument for any of these 3 tribes technically being the complex tribe. However, considering Mat Singh does hog up the screen time and also ends up being the underdogs moving forward, I will still lean towards Mat Singh, but again, that one's kind of by necessity. Next up for Cara Moen, again, fans versus favorites, so the winner does come from the favorite tribe, Bakal, And again, to me, again, they had a massive advantage in terms of screen time here. But even beyond that, the fans tribe ends up being very one note, being the cool kids versus the others, and there ends up being a lot of no names on that tribe. And while the editing for Bacall is not necessarily great either, especially with people like Cochran and Phillip hugging up the screen time there, and also with the dynamics there not even being that well defined by the time of the swap, I'll still lean towards them being the complex tribe, largely because, again, like, they do have a larger presence on the show, despite not really going the tribal for the majority of it. Next up, we do have Blood versus Water, where this is a really weird one, because Gelong, the returnee tribe, ends up having the winner. However, I will say that I do think Tadhana is definitely the more complex tribe to me. Like, Gelong is a tribe that so much of the early content there revolves around Aris and him dominating that tribe. But again, that storyline kind of wraps up by the time of the merge. Tyson does get a decent amount of content, especially pertaining to his relationship with Jervis. But I do really feel like the Tadhana tribe gets so much more complexity through us getting the, again, Men Alliance that ends up dominating things early on. We get Brad Culpepper being such a major character there. Vetus, John Cody end up being major figures there. Sierra is a major figure there. I mean, to me, like, Tadhana really just gets a lot more of the focus and does get a lot more complexity to me. So I do feel like this is one of the few recent seasons where I do feel like this theory doesn't really work. Next up, we have Survivor Kaguyan, where the winner comes from Apari. And again, as I mentioned before, 3 tribe seasons are very tough. And to me, Apari is complex enough. I think this is one of these situations where you can argue that Apari is the complex tribe. You can argue that Luzon is the complex tribe. However, I think it is very clear that the Beauty tribe is not the complex tribe. And I think that is enough for this theory to really work here, where, I mean, despite Apari never going to tribal, we do know quite a bit about their dynamics. We do know everything Tony was doing on that tribe. We do know about Sarah and Tony's relationship there. We do know about Tony and Trish's relationship. We do know that Cliff was like dominating the tribe in his relationship with Wu. And quite a bit is set up on Apari, despite the fact that he never go to tribal. So I will still lean towards Apari being the complex tribe there. Next up, for San Juan del Sur, we do have Hanapu containing the winner. And again, to me, this is a very clear-cut case. I think Hanapu is clearly the complex tribe. However, this is another case where it's, again, like, Coyopa technically gets more screen time. Again, Coyopa goes to tribal consistently. However, their content mostly revolves around John Rocker and Josh, while Hanapu, who rarely go to tribal, get a good chunk of complexity set up for its players, namely with people like Jeremy and Keith and John Mish. It contains some of the bigger characters of the season with those figures, plus also Natalie Anderson and Missy. So again, to me, I do feel like Hanapu is the clear complex tribe here. Next up, we have Survivor One World, where the winner comes from Escamecca, and I will say that Escamecca is probably the more complex tribe. However, I do think, again, this is a 3-tribe season. I don't think either of the 3 are necessarily uncomplex, where No Caller gets their relationships pretty well defined early on. However, I don't feel like they really set up too many future storylines with them. The White Collar gets also very well defined relationships, and we do also see the Tyler and Carolyn relationship that becomes important later on. However, on Escamecca, again, we get a lot of content from Mike, Rodney, and Dan. I will say that I don't think the dynamics there were as well defined as the other 2 tribes. However, again, they never went to tribal, and considering they never go to tribal until the final episode before they end up swapping, I do think the amount of complexity that they get in the early days of that tribe is enough for me to still say that this theory probably works here. Next up, we got Survivor Cambodia, where we have Bayon. And I think this is a weird case where, again, we get a swap after only 2 rounds. And I think it's really tough to say either of these were necessarily the complex tribe. And really, I think in general, it's very tough to say that any of these were complex tribes, considering how often we swapped on this season. Though with that said, Bayon does get a decent amount of content, considering the fact that, again, they never go to tribal. We do get well-established relationships with Jeremy, Savage, and Joe. We do get the Steven being a fish out of water sort of storyline. Again, there are a lot of people there that kind of get shafted in the edit, but again, they didn't have much time to utilize to show them. So again, this is a season where, like, I don't think the theory fully works. However, it's also because of weird circumstances, considering it's an all-star season and there were a bevy of swaps. Next up, we have Korong, where here we have Gondal, the Beauty tribe. And this is one of these situations where, again, it is a 3-tribe format. And I wouldn't necessarily say Gondal is the most complex tribe of the three. However, I will say it's the most unnecessary complex tribe of the three. Again, it is a tribe that never goes to tribal, yet despite that, we get very well-defined relationships there. We see the all-girls alliance that we later found out was made up just to give them content. We do see the relationship between Ty and Caleb. We do see a lot from Ty, who is very clearly going to be a major character there. We see a lot from Michelle to the point where it became very obvious that she was going to be the winner. I mean, to me, again, like Gondal, I think is clearly the more complex tribe here in terms of content that didn't need to be shown. So I do think the theory works out here. Next up for Millennials vs. Gen X, we do have Vanua as a complex tribe. Again, the Millennials tribe. And again, they were clearly shown as more important here than Gen X, despite the fact that, again, they don't go to tribal as much. But on the Millennials tribe, we do get a well-rounded look at the tribe dynamics. We do know quite a bit about a lot of the players there. We do know about the Figgy and Taylor relationship. We do know where Jay is at in the game. Adam and Zeke get a decent amount of content there as well. Hannah gets a good amount of content. Michaela gets a lot of content. I mean, it's very clear from early on that Millennials were the more complex tribe over Gen X, who, despite the fact that they kept on going the tribal, weren't really given clear dynamics within the core majority, where a lot of people within that majority weren't really given that much content. And it was really David and Ken that were given the majority of the content on that tribe, which, again, in comparison to the Millennials tribe, it really wasn't enough there. It was pretty clear Millennials were the complex tribe there. Next up, we have Survivor Game Changers, and this is another one of the bigger modern examples where this just simply doesn't work. Nuku is the tribe that contains the winner. However, I think they're clearly not the complex tribe. However, again, this is a situation where we do swap after only 2 rounds, and all of the big characters from the pre-merge here end up being on Mana. You have Tony, Sandra, you have Malcolm, you have even like a Varner, even like a Haley, even like a Caleb. It's like these people that are more prominent early on in the game are mostly on Mana, while Nuku contains a lot of the people that make it deep into the game, but are also given very little time for them to develop. So through that, again, I think this is a very blatant example where Nuku wasn't the complex tribe here. Next up, we have Heroes vs. Healers versus Hustlers, where, again, I think this is a situation where there is one very clear non-complex tribe, where I think Soko, the Healers tribe, was very clearly not the complex tribe. So I think you can debate it between Luvu and Yawa. Luvu does contain the winners, the Heroes tribe. And I will say I do think they are the more complex tribe. Again, it contains a very well-defined relationship between Ben and Chrissy that obviously becomes very important moving forward. We have a good grasp of the dynamics on this tribe. And while, again, you could say the same thing about Yawa and also the like Devin and Ryan relationship, I do feel like Devin as an individual there was not as complex early on as a Chrissy or a Ben, and I feel like that's the major reason I lean towards Luvu being the complex tribe here. Next up for Ghost Island, we have Navidi, and again, this is one of these situations where it's very clear that Navidi is the complex tribe, despite the fact that they don't go to tribal. I mean, Malolo is simply just not well defined, where yes, we know that there is this majority group, however, the dynamics within that majority group are very wonky on the show, and yes, we do get a decent amount of content from people like a Brendan and a Stephanie who are within the majority there. Same thing with Michael Yerger, but it's not really as much complexity as what we saw from Navidi with people like a Dominic, a Wendell, Chris Noble getting a lot of complexity early on. Now, I will say from this that this is, again, a weird situation where we do swap after only 2 rounds. So again, there wasn't that much to really add to the complexity of that group. However, I do think even post-swap, the people from the original Navidi get so much complexity moving forward, where even beyond the swap, a lot of the Malolo members just don't get as well-defined relationships moving forward either. So again, the clear answer here to me is Navidi. Next up for David versus Goliath, we do have the David tribe containing the winner. And again, to me, they're clearly the more complex tribe here. Again, the Davids get a lot of more positive personal content for the majority of its members. We do see a lot of relationships there as well with like the Nick and Christian relationship, Christian and Gabby. We see Nick and Elizabeth, Elizabeth and Lyrsa. And really just in general, the tribe as a whole is given this massive storyline from very early on of being the underdogs. And you can clearly tell that that was leading up to something as well. Now, I will say that the Goliaths were not necessarily uncomplex. Like, I do feel like the Goliaths actually got a decent amount of content in their own right in those first few episodes as well. However, I just feel like the Davids were very clearly more complex, and because of that, I do feel like the theory works here. Next up, we have probably one of the bigger examples of the theory working, and this is from Edge of Extinction, where Manu is the tribe that contains the winner and is very clearly the more complex tribe here, and it's not really close. Again, Kama is very barely focused on, really only getting shown to have Joe and Aubrey on the bottom, and us having this massive glob of majority alliance that is just very undefined. While on Manu, just so many of the more complex characters come from that tribe. I mean, you got Kelly, David, you got War Dog, you got Rick Devens, you got Lauren even. Now, I will say that Chris, who does eventually end up winning, is not necessarily the most complex person from that tribe. However, again, he does still win coming from that tribe. And also further proves the point of the complex tribe theory here through the fact that despite Manu getting so much negativity as a tribe as the season moves on, they still end up containing the winner due to how complex that they are. And again, to me, I think this is a pretty clear-cut example of the theory working. Next up, for IOI, we do have Vokai, again, kind of similar to Navidi to me, where I think they're just way more well-defined, despite the fact that they rarely go to tribal. Lyro's content always felt more circumstantial, where yes, we did have a decent breakdown of their dynamics. However, I felt like very few solid storylines were built up there for moving forward, while on Vokai, we got to see so many relationships. A lot coming from Tommy, a lot coming from Kelly. Jason Linden gets a decent amount of content there. I feel like we had a better grasp on the dynamics of that tribe as well. Again, to me, Vokai is the clear complex tribe. Next up, for Survivor 40, we do have Dakal containing the winner, which to me had, again, very well-established relationships despite not getting that much focus. Again, they rarely go to tribal. To me, the other tribe didn't really have that well-established of relationships until pretty late into the pre-merge. I'm like, we didn't know about like, oh, old school versus new school, but that felt like the majority of their content there. Now, I will say that I don't think this is a clear-cut case. I do think you can make the argument that Sele is the more complex tribe, but again, I feel like this is a situation where Dakal is the tribe that gets the most unnecessary complexity through us having a good breakdown of the tribe, with there being the Poker Alliance versus the Game Changers Alliance, with these single people being in the middle. Obviously, Yule gets a lot of content. We can see the Tony and Sarah content. Sophie gets a lot of complexity here. Same thing with Kim. So, I mean, again, to me, I feel like the Call is the tribe that stands out to me as the complex one here. And then we move on to 41, where, again, the season that inspired this video, where again, it is a 3-tribe season, and as I mentioned before, usually the tribe that has the least complexity in the pre-merge, you can immediately rule out, while the other 2 are usually the ones that you debate on. However, in this season, it's the tribe that has the least complexity early on that ends up being the one that contains the winner. Again, Ua and Yasa were very clearly more complex tribes. However, again, Ua felt more circumstantial considering they went to tribal more. However, Yasa just got a bevy of complexity with them being set up as the underdogs early on, despite the fact that they were winning challenges by that point. But the fact that the winner comes from Luvu is a bit of a surprise considering how little of content they got really up until like episode 4. And even in the episode where they get a bit more highlighted, it didn't really feel like storylines that were going to be that important later down the road as in the end game, though it does end up actually being so. But despite that, I mean, the fact that like Erica and Heather's relationship is never shown in the pre-merge, the fact that we don't really know much about what Nasir was doing in the pre-merge, like there's a lot of things that they can clearly have shown from the Luvu tribe that they just didn't. And I feel like that is a major indicator that they are not the complex tribe here, despite the fact that they contain the winner. So for me, again, I don't feel like the theory works out here. But there we go. I mean, that is me going through every season of Survivor, talking about if the complex tribe theory works on those seasons. Again, I do think it works on the majority of seasons. Like, obviously, this last season was a massive outlier. However, I do feel like the majority of the seasons have a definitive yes in terms of the theory's effectiveness. Now, there are some seasons that are very wonky to me, and there are some seasons that are just outright ineffective. However, I do think the majority of this time, this theory does work. So I do think it was an interesting exercise to go through them. Again, later down the road, I would like to do more Edgic-related videos to this. I already have a decent amount of ideas for them. It's just a matter of actually finding the time to do them. I mean, I have ideas like talking about the journey edit, talking about the merge boot edit, talking about a runner-up edit, talking about the editing of penultimate episodes, the editing of premiere episodes, the editing of merge episodes. Again, there's a decent amount of topics that I would like to cover down the road, but for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.